Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, the podcast where nostalgia comes alive. Since July of 2021, Jake and his friends have interviewed professionals in the worlds of acting, directing, writing, puppeteering, and many more. Who will they be chatting with in this week's interview? Find out in this Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. I'm one of your co-hosts, Chris Bixby, and with me today, as always, our other co-host, Matt Bingel, and our host, Jake Deffinbaugh. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. How about
Good.
you?
Good. Once my camera actually works, other than that, I'm well.
Yes, I am good as well.
Yes. So what do we have?
Today we are speaking to someone who used to be a music director on the show Sesame Street for several years. He also worked on the music for the hit Disney movie, The Little Mermaid, did some work for Nick Jr. Online, and we're here to talk about that and some other things as well. And here he is, Robby Merkin. Happy to have you here.
Happy to be here, guys.
Awesome.
My
Happy to
pleasure.
have you here.
Awesome.
Yes.
So to kick things off, could you introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure. I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I've worked in probably every corner of the entertainment industry at one point or another, as a pianist, performer, recording artist, studio musician, I guess, arranger, orchestrator, conductor, music director, composer, pretty much all of it, sound editor. I've worked in theater, dance, television, film, internet, you name it, recording.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I've been very fortunate, I will say. I've stepped into a couple of iconic projects, which is an amazing feeling, to have worked on something that is instantly recognizable and on everybody's plate, everybody's mind. I get a big kick out of seeing certain phrases in popular use. Like you'll see "feed me" from Little Shop of Horrors. I did the off-Broadway show. I did the film. Knowing that you have contributed to something that has become part of the lexicon of pop culture, of general cultures, it's just an amazing feeling. One of my favorite Sesame Street stories is when they first issued the jackets for employees, and I got on a subway train in New York wearing my Sesame Street jacket, and it triggered a conversation among a bunch of college kids about, they saw the jacket and they commented on it, and then they started talking to each other, arguing heatedly over whether Snuffleupagus was real or just part of Big Bird's imagination.
Wow.
And it blew me away that all these years later, these kids grew up with it, but now they were in college, and all these years later, it was worth an argument to them. It mattered that much. So, it's a great thing to be involved in something noble. You can sleep at night, and it contributes so much to so many people.
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So can you talk about your background and how you grew up?
Yes, sure. I grew up in, I don't know how, anybody here from New York among you guys?
No, but
Right,
no. I was just in New York last September.
Okay. I grew up in a little beach community called Rockaway, which is a peninsula very thin peninsula between the Atlantic Ocean, and north of it is a bay. And it's about 4 blocks wide, the whole thing. So the northern most point is the bay. The southernmost point is the ocean. So when you have a hurricane, the waves meet in front of your house. It just washes right over the whole peninsula. Anyway, that's where I grew up. My backyard, in essence, was Manhattan. I could see it from my lawn, and my parents happened to be pretty culturally aware people. My mom had been a modern dancer, among other things, and knew Martha Graham. I don't know if you know that name. Martha Graham was a groundbreaking modern dance choreographer.
Oh wow.
Anyhow, so she got she volunteered to lead the Rockaway Music and Arts Council. So she had to book acts to perform in venues in Rockaway. So she would drag me around, like when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, to concerts and performances of ballet and modern dance and classical music and jazz music and all this stuff, so that she could make contact with the artists and try to cajole them into coming to Rockaway. So I was exposed to a ton of stuff. As a result of which my taste has always been extremely eclectic. I'm kind of very, very open to anybody's creative efforts in any direction. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my parents used to take my sister and I to visit my mother's parents, my grandparents, and they had absolutely nothing in their apartment for children. So, after a little while, we were bored out of our minds, but they had an upright piano, an old beat up upright piano in a small hallway. My sister and I would go there, and I would sit on the piano bench. She would sit next to me. She would make up stories, and I would bang out sounds on the piano. It wasn't really music, but like if she said, and then there was a storm, I would do, thunder down below and lightning up at the top. But I realized at an incredibly young age that the piano was like an orchestra. It had such an unbelievable range of sounds. And I decided at the age of 4 that I wanted to play piano. So that was the beginning for me. By the time I was in 6th grade, I was playing in bands. And I still didn't think it was going to be a career, but somewhere in high school, it started to become clear to me that there was no moment in time that I was happier than when I was working on music. And the world had become a pretty screwed up place. The Vietnam War was on, Martin Luther King had been assassinated, John F. Kennedy had been assassinated, and there was a real need to get involved in something that was positive and creative and would make a contribution in some way to beautifying the world. So I dropped out of college after my freshman year, and I had no idea what I was going to do, but I spent every day playing piano all day long. And then a friend of mine who was going to the University of Wisconsin, his mom said, David needs a car. You don't seem to be doing anything. You want to drive his car out there? Sure. So I got in the car and I drove 21 straight hours to Madison, Wisconsin. And when I got there just after dawn, everybody was asleep. So I was exploring his apartment and I found a room full of instruments. So I was exhausted from driving. So I curled up on the floor among the instruments and went to sleep. And then I started hearing noises, which woke me up, and I see feet going by. I'm like looking straight out at the floor and I see feet going by, and nobody's paying the slightest bit of attention to me. And up at the front of the room, there's a guy with a guitar who stopped. He's like just fiddling with his guitar. And then he stops and he looks out and he goes, all right, we have to talk about what we need. We need some things. We need a bass amp. And I go, I have a bass amp. And all the faces turn and look at me, but they don't know who I am. So then they look back at him and he says, and we need a PA. And I go, I have a PA. And all the faces turn and look at me. And then they look back at him and they say, and we really should get a keyboard player. And I go, I'm a keyboard player. So he says, who are you? And I said, I'm David's friend. And my friend David had turned out to be part of this band as the drummer.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So they said, well, where's your stuff? I said, in New York. And they went, I said, but I have a car. And they went, And we literally, I had never heard them play. We just got in the car and drove to New York and got my stuff and went back. And I was then in a band, a very strange, very adventurous, avant-garde kind of band. And I found myself hearing music in my head that I didn't know how to get out. And I thought, well, I could go back to New York, give myself over to the jazz community. But I had a feeling that if anything goes wrong, I'm there for life. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there are so many temptations, drugs and whatever. And I just thought it's a little risky. Or I could go back to school. I had no money. But at the time, the City University of New York was free. So I went there.
Oh,
Only because I dropped out of college after my freshman year. My academic record was awful. So I couldn't matriculate. So I started going at night. Taking night classes. Like my fellow students were postal workers and housewives, and but I was taking music courses, and because I felt far behind, and I was there to learn what I wanted to learn. I didn't really care who my classmates were. Any assignment I got, I did like 3 in response to one assignment, because I felt like I had to catch up. And after a semester, they not only matriculated me, they put me in advanced placement classes,
Oh,
which I
wow.
thought it had to be a terrible mistake because I was like an ex-hippie band rock and roll guy, but they meant it, and I thrived. I was very fortunate. I ended up spending the last 2 years, my junior and senior year, studying privately with a Pulitzer Prize winning composer. When I say privately, I was excused from all classes.
Wow.
My entire education was privately working with this Pulitzer Prize winner and one of the
my
most
gosh.
important music theorists in New York. It was just such a blessing to be in this situation. It's just incredible. And when I got out, Queens wanted me to teach. My school wanted me to teach there, right?
hmm
So I'm teaching, and one of the things that starts to happen is you listen to your students. I had bought into the whole academic thing. I was very happy to teach what was on the agenda, what was in the curriculum of the school. But you start to hear students saying, but why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to learn that? And after a while, it began to sink in that there were things beyond the curriculum that people needed, and there were things in the curriculum that they might not necessarily need. But as it happened, as I'm coming to this realization, the school calls me up and they say, we're aware of the fact that you were once in bands and you played rock and roll. So you have a whole other world of music in your pocket besides the classical music that we teach. And we want to start attracting students who aren't music majors to come in and sample the classes in the music department. Do you think you could design a course that works with popular music, but teaches the fundamentals of music, the same fundamentals that we teach for classical music, so that they could then go on and take more elective classes in the music department? And I said, yeah, baby, sure. So I taught this class. I don't remember even what they called the class, but in the first semester, they gave me a regular classroom and it was standing room. There were like 30 or 40 more students than could fit in this room. So the second semester, word got out, those kids who took the class spread the word. Their friends wanted it. The second semester, they had close to 200 people wanting to get into this class. So they put it in the auditorium, and one of the things that happened is I started to think, maybe this academic world is a little limiting. And in the meantime, I thought maybe I can affect change. So I started lobbying for the idea of a course of study that focused primarily on popular music, that taught music theory, that taught harmony and counterpoint and history and everything they teach, but through pop music. Well, you can imagine this met with a great deal of resistance. And finally, one semester, like a week before the semester started or something like that, they said to me, okay, we'll give you an experimental class. You're going to have one class. I had no time to create a curriculum. So I just sort of went in and I was winging it, asking students to come to me, each week, bring me a song that you're interested in, and we'll analyze it and I'll show you its structure and I'll show you how theory applies to it and all this stuff. And of course, I got a tremendous amount of criticism from the traditionalists. And at the same time, I got a phone call from a former student of mine, someone I had given piano lessons to when I was like 16.
Oh, wow.
And she had hated me. She had hated me and hated the taking the lessons, but her parents forced her, right? Well, it turned out she had become a choreographer. And she had moved to Denmark and become like their #1 choreographer.
Oh my
But
gosh.
she felt like
Wow.
it felt to her like, the arena was too small. You're not going to get known beyond Denmark if you're famous in Denmark,
Mm.
So she came to New York hoping to break into the dance world in New York. And she called me up because I was the only person in New York City she knew who did music, even though she had hated me. Right.
Mm.
So we started collaborating on things. And I'm writing music for dance. And she was into dance theater. So
Mm.
some of them were like evening long theatrical pieces told through dance. And here I'm having this experience where to get my master's degree, I spent 7 months writing a string quartet that was performed once, never again. And with the dance, I was watching a rehearsal, having maybe 2 meetings, writing a ton of music, and within 2 days, you're performing it. It was so immediate, and I'm in front of an audience now and getting the feedback which is all that I ever wanted, was to make music that reached people, that people reacted to. So I left academia. Now I'm out in this world of dancers and choreographers and theater, and people start coming to me and inviting me to write dramatic music for plays, things like this.
Huh.
And at a certain point, I ended up writing a musical based on an old story that was made into a play by Dylan Thomas
Hmm.
called The Devil and the Doctor, or The Doctors and the Devil. I can't remember. But anyway, it's based on a true story, something that happened in England at a time when, in the 1800s, at a time when it was difficult for medical students to get cadavers. And these 2 guys, low lives, lived in a cheap rooming house, and one of the tenants died, and they sold the body to a doctor. And they thought, wow, this is a great way to make money. So they started helping people die. First, they became grave robbers, and then they started helping people die. And this is a true story. And it became sort of, one of those stories that parents tell kids to scare them, to teach them to be cautious in the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So it entered the sort of popular mainstream, and it's been made into 3 movies, I think.
Wow.
There have
Oh
been
my gosh.
more than 1 play. So this guy comes to me and he wants to write a musical based on this. And as a result of that, we got wooed by BMI and ASCAP. Do you know what those are?
Hmm.
Okay. And suddenly we're in this world of Broadway and pop music and, big time people. And I quickly started getting offers to do orchestrations. The first one was, it was a play that was written around the songs of Carole King, but a plot was devised. And the choreographer was the woman who had choreographed Hair on Broadway.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh my
Oh, that's cool.
gosh.
So,
Nice.
I'm thinking, this is great. I'm going to learn from the best. I'm going to be working with the best. And I was just supposed to be the orchestrator, but a couple of days before the first rehearsal, I came home from being out for an evening with my wife, and there was a note slipped under the door that said, our orchestrator got a better paying job. Can you orchestrate? I was, sure, I can orchestrate, you know. So I'm the orchestrator too. I had no idea what that meant in terms of theater. You know, orchestration for me was you take a completely composed piano piece written by Scriabin or Brahms, and you assign individual lines to members of the orchestra, right?
Mhm.
This is going to be clarinet. This is going to be strings. That's what I thought. What I got was 25 pages of melody with chord symbols.
Wow.
No other notes, right? So my job was really to write everything else, to compose it and orchestrate it, right? I had no idea. So I'm up all night every night, and I'm in rehearsal all day. And the first rehearsal, the choreographer says, all right, I want to work on such and such song. Okay, a 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And I start playing it. And she goes, what are you doing? And I said, excuse me? She said, that's not the tempo. And I said, well, that's the tempo you counted off. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, you went 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. That's the tempo. She goes, no, it isn't. That means ready, set, go. You know the tempo. I don't have to give you the tempo. And I thought I have entered I'm down the rabbit hole. This is Alice in Wonderland. You know, you click, you're giving time, right? I had no idea what she was talking about. It turns out she was fairly unusual. This was not a common thing among other choreographers that I worked with, but it was really an adventure. Every single day was a challenge. I had no idea, but it exposed me to people who were professional makers of musicals, which is not what I came up with, not what I was terribly interested in. But this show grew and grew and grew. This show that I was working on with Carole King. We started us, I think, with a 4-piece band, and we ended up with a 9-piece band. And we went up and down the East Coast. We sold out wherever we went. We thought we're going right to Broadway. So we came to New York, and with 1 day notice, we did a backers audition, basically, at a concert hall in New York for all the Broadway producers. We had no sets, we had no costumes, we didn't even have a curtain. So it was just the band on stage and the actors in front of the band doing the show. And the producer called each of us and said, you have to invite all your friends because it's got to look like there's a real excited crowd there. Hmm. So I called a couple of people, and one of my friends brought a friend of hers who happened to be Alan Menken.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And as the last notes are dying away, still hanging in the air, and I'm the only person left on stage, I'm collecting the music from the music stands. Alan comes running down the aisle going, Robby, 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 I want you to orchestrate my next show. Now, I had met Alan. This is a funny story, too. I went to NYU, New York University, when there was a second campus uptown in the Bronx in New York. And it doesn't exist anymore. But I went there, and very quickly I got known as the hot piano player on campus. And then some of my friends, the friends that I made with whom I played music, started talking about somebody else. And I got jealous, to be honest, especially when they told me that they were joining his band. Oh. So I said, wait a minute, who is this guy? I got to find out about this. So I played a couple of instruments. So I joined his band as the bass player. So I played in Alan Menken's college band.
Wow. But
I didn't think he remembered. You know, a lot of years had passed, and we were all pretty stoned in those days. And he'd gone on, in a completely different direction with writing for theater. So I didn't think he remembered me. But I guess he did. At any rate, I thought he was sort of an idiot. I remembered him as this kind of stoned guy who barely made eye contact, And so he called me up repeatedly to get me to come listen to this show that he wanted me to work on, and I kept trying to put him off. I was busy orchestrating a piece by Charles Strauss, who wrote Annie. So I thought, what do I need an unknown pothead like Alan Menken for, right? But I finally went because I couldn't get him to stop calling me any other way. And he played me Little Shop of Horrors.
Wow.
And the rest is
Gosh.
kind of history,
Mhm.
I flipped over it and we did it and became an instant hit. We started off performing in a theater that held 50 people, and there were lines around the block at every single show, and the audiences were almost entirely Broadway composers, lyricists, directors, producers, actors, film people. It was extraordinary.
Wow.
And I started off, they told me, we can't really afford to pay you as an orchestrator. So, but we can pay you as a player. So you'll play second keyboard and you'll do the arrangements, but we can't really pay for that. So I was sitting in the pit, and Alan and I are about the same height. And in those days I wore glasses and he wore glasses, and people would come over to me, like famous directors would come over to me and say, "Fabulous work, Alan." And I would say, "Thank you." And Alan would punch me, I couldn't resist torturing him, but then we moved to a bigger theater, and the music director, the conductor, went on to open the Los Angeles production, and then the national tour, and then the London production. So I was made music director, and the rumors started spreading about a film being made, and I got tapped. When Frank Oz, who was hired to direct it, started making his plans, he thought I should have one representative of the play on my staff, and it was me. I was the guy he asked. So here I am suddenly I've made these great leaps from having been in academia to small off-Broadway and off-Broadway productions, to an enormous hit show, to a major motion picture, right? It's just, it's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. And from there on, jobs just rolled in, and there was a lot of stuff I didn't know about how the industry worked or what was expected of me. Like, I didn't understand 5, 6, 7, 8, it's like there was just so much I didn't understand. So I decided that if I show that, I won't get hired. People will lose faith in me. So I never would admit to not knowing something. I would just say, yeah, sure, I can do that. And then teach myself, when Alan called me to do Little Mermaid, he said, of course, we're going to work with a bank of synthesizers attached to a computer. And I went, sure, of course. I had never touched a computer. It was, desktop computers were relatively new in those days. So I hung up the phone and I panicked. I called a friend of mine, my closest friend, who was a bass player, and I said, what am I going to do? And he said, in those days, believe it or not, this is the early 80s, or mid 80s, there was one person in all of New York City who taught the interface of computers and music. There was maybe 1 or 2 apps available to work on music through, and there was one guy. And between the day that I had to be in LA to start working and his schedule, we had one lesson that began with, this is the button that turns the computer on. One lesson that started from nothing, right? So I asked the people at Disney, can I show up on a Friday and have the keys to my room and come on the weekend? They said, sure. So I spent 48 hours not sleeping, just teaching myself how to run these synthesizers that Alan had chosen, that I knew nothing about, through this piece of software that I'd never used on a computer that I was seeing for the second time in my life, And that Monday morning, we started working on Little Mermaid.
Nice.
And that kind of became the pattern for my career. You know, I just,
Nice.
and I can't say it was courage. In fact, it was probably fear. So it was fear of admitting what I didn't know, and fear that if I acted like I didn't know, I wouldn't get other jobs. So I just decided I have to rise to these challenges, and things went from there.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Little Shop of Horrors. I mentioned earlier we talked to Marty Robinson about Little Shop of Horrors as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Marty's the best. He's an angel. He's an absolute angel of a human being, incredibly talented. He was the first person I met on that show. The week they were supposed to go into rehearsal, my first child was born. So I missed the whole
Oh,
first week.
Aw.
And when I showed up, you know, so everybody's now established. They all know each other. I
right.
show up at the rehearsal hall, which was above it was on the second floor above a deli of some sort, and one floor below a house of prostitution. An Asian themed whorehouse was right above us. So I'm walk up these rickety stairs in this filthy hallway, wondering what the heck I'm getting into, and I open the door, and what I see is these enormous, like polyethylene plastic, rubber things coming at me like fingers, like 6 foot long fingers. And I'm following along the ground. My eyes are going like that, and I look up, and at the end of these fingers is this guy with this sweet smile and really long hair, and he just gives me a big smile, like, "Hi, pal," you know. And it was Marty. And the things that I was looking at were the tentacles. He was building the tentacles, and they were so long they stretched right to the door of the rehearsal space. It was the very first thing I saw. So,
Wow. That's awesome.
Wow.
yeah, and I actually then I went on to do. I did a lot of freelance work for Sesame Street. I had already been doing some, but I hadn't really met the cast. But then I got the opportunity to continue working and do more and more stuff and expand my palette and see Marty on the set, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway,
Mm.
that whole thing was an astonishing experience, you know, to step into something. You never know when you start working on a show what its future is going to be. There's no way to know. No matter
Yeah.
how good
Absolutely.
it is, no matter how ferocious the talents are, there's just no way to predict.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
many people came to work on Little Shop who were at the beginning of their careers, and it was a huge hit. Put everybody on the map. Everybody who was involved went on to real serious careers. It's just an astonishing thing.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you also worked as music director and orchestrator in Elvis the musical. Can you talk a bit about that?
Oh, sure. I'm surprised you know about that. Yeah, absolutely. I had gotten to know Phil Ramone. I don't know if you know that name. Phil was at the time probably the biggest record producer in America.
Oh, wow.
And he
Oh my
took on
gosh.
the job of doing the Little Shop cast album.
Hmm.
So I got to know him. Um, he was at a stage in his life where he had worked for so many years with a particular pool of studio musicians who were the best in the business, but it was getting almost boring for him. You know, he was saying, like, these guys come in and I know exactly what they're going to do every time. And they're going to do it better than anybody on the planet, but they're going to do what I can predict. You know, I'm looking for something different and fresh. And, you know, I want guys who come in and every session is like, for them, like the first session, the most exciting thing in the world, as opposed to guys for whom it's a job. Yeah, we do what we do great, and we can make it sound passionate, but it's just a job, you know.
Right.
So we spent a
Mhm.
lot of time together. The whole band from Little Shop spent a great deal of time with him. And he's the one who called me about the Elvis show. The producers had reached out to him saying, like, what should we do? How should we handle this? And he said, well, I can help you and I can help put it together, but I'm not going on tour with you. I'm not going to lead the band or anything like that. So you should hire Robby Merkin.
Uh-huh.
That's how I got involved with it. And what can I tell you about that? Well, first of all, we held open auditions. I think we first held some auditions through agents, but the kind of talent we got was far too slick to be convincing as an Elvis, who came from a very raw Southern background. So we held open auditions all over the country. Hundreds upon hundreds of the strangest people you've ever met in your life came to these auditions. I met multiple people who had legally changed their names to Elvis Aaron Presley, including women
Oh, wow.
who were legally Elvis Aaron Presley. We met people who thought they were him. We met people. One of my favorites was this guy who fancied himself a professional Elvis imitator. He was about 4'11" and weighed about 80 pounds. But he had the whole entourage. He had all the suits. He had a Mama Presley. He had the band. He had a Colonel Tom Parker, the Elvis's manager. People playing those roles wherever he
Wow.
went. He had this whole entourage. I mean, it was really crazy, but
Yeah.
fun. And it was like a lesson in what America's really about, a strange lesson, and
true.
when we performed, we developed certain fans, mostly older women who had known Elvis's work in their youth, in their teen years, and they were still utterly devoted, and they would follow us. We toured, and they would go from theater to theater to theater and sit in the audience at every damn show. It was
That is,
and then of course they felt like they had ownership of the material, so they felt entitled to seek us out and give us counsel and tell us what we were doing wrong and how we should improve it, and he praised and love on us, and it was just a fascinating experience, just
Wow.
amazing.
awesome.
Definitely.
I bet. Especially being Elvis, you can have those kinds of people.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We
Mhm.
ended up hiring 3 actors to portray Elvis: a young Elvis, an Elvis in his prime, and an aging Elvis.
Mm.
And the young Elvis was played by a guy who actually was, first of all, one of the most talented people I ever met. He played drums, bass, lead guitar, piano, and sang like Ray Charles. The guy was unbelievable. I mean, he had an incredibly soulful presence.
Wow.
But he happened to be obsessed with Elvis. He had gone to Elvis's funeral. He had seen Elvis live like 25 times.
Wow.
He just
Wow.
for some reason it touched him, and
Oh boy.
so he brought a lot of
What?
authenticity. He was from Kentucky, a relatively small town in Kentucky, and we ended up hiring his whole band, all Kentucky people, which also lent a degree of authenticity to it. The guy who played him in his prime was a rockabilly star, on a small level. He was from North Carolina, I think, and he had done a few gigs as an Elvis impersonator because he actually looked like Elvis. If you just saw him walking down the street, you'd do a double take. And but he wasn't serious about Elvis. He thought the whole thing was sort of funny, but he was brilliant in this role. And the old guy who played the aging Elvis, was someone who had been an Elvis imitator, among other things. He also played his own music, but he was himself personally sort of in the same place Elvis was at the age that he was portraying. He was a guy who still thought he was hot shit, but actually had trouble singing, had trouble playing. He was so far past his own prime that the struggles he went through performing the show mirrored the struggles of the Elvis that he was portraying. So it was really oddly very authentic. It was quite a thing. It was quite a thing.
Huh. Awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely.
So aside from working on musicals, you brought this up earlier. You also supervised and arranged in one of Disney's most beloved movies, The Little Mermaid. What was it like getting to work on such a successful movie?
Well, first of all, again, like Little Shop, we had no idea when we started that, or at any point until the movie was released, that it was going to be that successful. Disney Animation at that moment in time had become very much a second-class citizen in the Disney company. In fact, it was kicked off the lot. If you went to the Disney studios, the streets were lined with trees that had been carved into the shape of like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, but
Mhm.
there was no animation to be found. The whole animation department was in mobile trailers in a parking lot about 25 minutes away. So there was no reason to think this was going to be a big hit. What had happened was Jeff Katzenberg was the head of Disney at that time, the guy who created DreamWorks. And he knew about Little Shop of Horrors. So he went to Howard Ashman, who wrote the book and the lyrics and directed it off Broadway, and said, "You have a blank check at Disney, whatever you want to do." And he said, "I always wanted to do cartoons." And Katzenberg reputedly looked at him and said, "No, you don't understand. You can do anything." Because as far as Katzenberg was concerned, the animation part was, a losing proposition. Who cared? And Howard said, "No, you don't understand. I want to do animation. That's what is there something in the pipeline, something you're working on?" And Katzenberg said, "Well, all right, fine. Yeah, we're working on something now." And he said, "Do you have a songwriter? You have songs yet?" Katzenberg said, "No." He said, "Well, let me bring in Alan and we'll add songs for you. But I really want to learn about animation. How can I learn about everything, how it's done?" He said, "Well, we'll make you the producer." Which, when you think of it, it's the funniest thing in the world. The producer is the guy who puts everything together, and they were going to take Howard, who knew absolutely nothing, make him a producer. He wasn't, of course, in the end, he wasn't the kind of producer who put everything together. He had his area of expertise, but he got to rub shoulders with every part of the process. So he learned what he wanted to learn. And he called Alan, and Alan called me because Alan was terrified. He had come to know the world of theater, but he didn't know film and Hollywood, and it scared him. And I was part of his comfort zone, which terrified me, And then Alan is the one who says to me, "Of course, we're going to use computers." And so it was scary. But on the other hand, I was left alone a lot, which gave me the time to learn what I had to learn and also gave me a lot of creative freedom. And as a result, I was free to do my very best work, which was exciting. My room, the room they gave me was across the hall from the people who did computer animation. So I got to hang out and watch while they put together all the like the scene where Ursula becomes gigantic and the sea is
Yes.
on fire. I was able to watch that stuff develop.
Wow.
And it was an amazing creative challenge because things would happen like I was working on We Are the Daughters of Triton. And one of the artists came in, one of the animators came in and showed me a picture of a drawing he had done of a fantasy undersea orchestra with like a blowfish playing an instrument and, bass playing something, and all these different fish and octopuses and eels, And he said, and he had made up the instruments. Like he assumed Undersea, they're not going to play an actual clarinet or an actual bassoon. They're going to play something that they've invented. So he had all these detailed, fantastic looking instruments in this drawing. And he said, can you make it sound like this? Can you imagine? I looked at it and I said, yes, yes, please let me make it sound like that. Yeah. And,
Awesome.
there were things like the halls were lined with blow-ups of drawings for the movie.
Oh,
And
wow.
one of them showed what was intended to be the beginning of Under the Sea. And it showed Sebastian the crab using the back of his claws on the backs of a bunch of turtles lined up. Just like that, like that. And I looked at that, and nobody had said anything to me about how the song should sound. You know, Alan had made a demo with piano. I think he had an electric piano, maybe bass. So I knew what the music was, but how it should sound for the purpose of the film, I went back to the studio and I came up with like a marimba sound and a xylophone. I imagined what would banging on the shells of turtles sound like if it were pitched. You know?
Yeah.
That's how this whole thing worked. There was a constant back and forth between the visuals and the music. We inspired them, they inspired us, and it was an amazing thing to have to rise to, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Little Mermaid, amazing,
Amazing movie.
amazing,
So
and very classic too.
Yeah,
yes,
it's become a classic. I know.
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah.
So now one of your longest running jobs as a music director was on Sesame Street for several years. How did you begin working for that?
Another funny story. My
Another funny
son, the one who was born at the first week of rehearsal for Little Shop, reached an age where he was in daycare, and my schedule, I was still working on Little Shop, so I was conducting at night, but I had days free, so it was my job to take him and pick him up, you know. So I brought him into the daycare center every day and met some of the other parents, and one of the parents introduced herself to me and told me that she was a film editor,
Oh,
but
wow.
she had aspirations to be a director.
Mhm.
And she had managed to get a job doing 3 short films for Sesame Street. So she said, how would you like to be the composer? Yeah, sure,
gosh.
absolutely. I'll tell you how I knew Sesame Street. In my hippie days, that's when Sesame Street first hit the air. And my friends and I watched it a couple of times and thought, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen on a screen. You know, it was so fast and cutting back and forth between puppets and animation and film. It just seemed like a lunatic world. So we would get high and watch it. That was our impression of Sesame Street.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even think about the educational values at that time. But so we did 3 films. One was about reading a map.
Oh, yeah.
One was about finding, and it all took place in Central Park. One was about brushing your teeth, I think. There's something else in the park. I can't remember now. But so there were 3 short films, and I met with the film producer, and we got along great, like right away. It just happened that we got along. We found a common thread of humor, and like she said, what do you think you would do here? And whatever I suggested to her, she was, oh, that sounds great. Yeah, do that. So I wrote for these 3 films, and then the producer started calling me back and saying, I got an animation. You want to do this? I've got this. You want to do this? And she would give me like 3 films at a time. And so I not only did I write the music, but basically the composer would come into the recording studio and lead the band. It was a standing Sesame Street band. And at that time, for whatever reason, they didn't have a music director. So each composer became the music director for his or her own piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got to interact with the band. And I did a film that was based on a song that Jeff Moss had written. Jeff Moss did Rubber Ducky, and C is for Cookie, and just so he was one of the original writers for the show. And he liked what I did, so he began calling upon me. Like any project of his, anytime he had a song, he wanted me to be the orchestrator or arranger. So I was getting in, do you know what I mean? I was doing more and more freelance work for them.
Right.
And then I did Little Mermaid, and about a month after I got home from working on Little Mermaid, no, I shouldn't say that. It was about a month after it came out. Let's put it that way. After it was released in the theaters, I was called by the people at Sesame Street, and the conversation went, if we hired a music director, you wouldn't be interested, would you? Because they figured I'm Mr. Hollywood, and they could never afford me, and I must be too busy to bother. And it's like, no, man, Sesame Street sounds great. You know, I had to do that. So I got hired as the music director. And the first job they gave me, they had just signed on a new executive producer, and he came from the world of theater. So he understood that when you make a piece, you need something that holds it together. It has to have continuity. And that was completely counter to the history and structure of Sesame Street, which was episodic, you know? But my first assignment was to take finished edited shows and create musical transitions that had enough commonality among them. You know, obviously you designed the transition specifically to go from the end of this song to the beginning of that piece. But the idea was to use just enough continuity of feel and style that it felt like the whole hour was of a piece. It was a unit, not just episodic, you know?
Right.
And once I did that, the film producer came to me and said, you know, we have a whole library of films that are very valid educationally, but they're slower than what we do now. The show has gotten more second to second stimulus, let's say now. There's a different level of excitement. Do you think you could replace the original music if we gave you a pile of these films? So aside from working on the Daily Show, the season for shooting was something like 7 months long. When they wrapped from shooting, I still had post-production to do, but then they would give me a big pile of archive films. And everybody would go home, and I would spend the next 3 months scoring these films, bringing them up to date in feel and sound, you know? Again, it was an amazing challenge. After my initial work on the Daily Show, they were just about to start working on the 35th anniversary special. No, I'm sorry, the 25th anniversary special. And they threw me into it. I had yet to meet the cast. I hadn't met any of them, or the puppeteers, hadn't met anybody. And everybody was going to be in this. And I had to start creating music immediately. And I think the first one was the finale, which was an enormous arrangement of Sing, but interwoven with a new song to tell the story of the script that was going to make up the 25th anniversary special. So I'm collaborating with one of the longest time composers and lyricists on the show, and he's designing this new song, and I'm writing something to make it work in counterpoint to Sing. And I go to the producer and I say, is there anything anything I should know about the characters and their voice ranges or whatever? Like, do you want me to cater to anybody in particular? Do you want me to, who should get which lines, for instance, of the song? Because they told me they wanted a lot of solos. They wanted to be able to cut away to individual characters. So they went, no, up to you. But I barely knew the characters, and I certainly didn't know the singers. So I just put it together. I met as many of them as I could, and I put it together. And the first person I recorded was Kevin Clash.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
And Kevin walked in and
Nice.
he does a lot of characters. So I had like
Yes.
7 different of his characters woven into this piece, and he had to sing individual lines or phrases,
hmm
couplets in each character voice, right? So I said, how would you like to do this? Should we start with, say, Elmo and go through the whole piece as Elmo? Then we'll wind back and go through the whole piece as the next one. He said, no, just roll the tape. I said, you sure? Because I don't mind taking the time. No, just roll the tape. Without a rehearsal, I rolled the tape thinking this is going to be a throwaway. And he sang one character after another. As each line came up, he switched, and he played the sax player, the jazz, well, I forgot what his name was. But
Hoots.
Boots, yeah.
Hoots,
all
yeah.
like
Hoots,
this.
yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, Hoots.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
Hoots
did.
is
And,
awesome.
and Elmo's up here. And he just made these switches and sang it perfectly from beginning to end. With one take, he was done. I had never seen a talent like
What?
that. That's just, it's not
That
that he
is-
was the most talented person I've ever worked with, but
Right.
that's a unique thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
You had that, and then you had people in the live cast, particularly. Well,
Mhm.
also Carol Spinney, who did Big Bird, who weren't really singers, who struggled to get the notes and struggled to remember a melody after you taught it to them,
Mhm.
which was a shock to me because you don't know that from watching the show. The show, they nurture those people, they give them the chance to get it right. So again, here I was. I walked in the door and they handed me all the responsibility, and I knew nothing.
Mhm.
But it was great fun. It was the busiest I've ever been in my entire life. Because in those days, they did 165 episodes a season, 165 shows a season, with minimum of 4 new songs in each episode, and
Wow.
all the archive stuff, and new
Gosh.
films, minimum of 3 new film inserts a show. And I was doing all this music. Uh, there was no sleep involved, that's for sure. It was not stressful, but it put me mentally in a place I've never been before, where I would sit down at a drafting table with my empty sheets of music and open up a script and read it and come to the first cue and just pick up my pencil and start to go. Didn't have time to even think. I had so much music that I had to write complete in 3 days, because then was the recording studio scheduled, right?
Hmm.
And so I just would write without thinking. And the minute I came to the end of a piece, I'd look it over and go, okay, and go move to the next one. And it was just this flow that what it did for me was it lifted all ego out of the picture. There was no time to think, was that good? Was it not good? What are people going to think of my work? There's no time to think about it. So I just created. And it all went by so quickly. And there were so many switches, because it is an episodic show, switches of style and switches of mode, that when I got to the recording session, which might only be 3 days later, and I put the first piece of music on the stand and we started to play it, I didn't recognize it. It was like I was conducting someone else's music that I'd never heard before, which made it, again, there was no ego involved. I would listen to what was done. I could make changes. I could make adjustments. I could get excited about it without feeling like, I'm beating my own chest here, patting myself on the back. It's just, all the work was pure in a way that I'd never experienced before, because there was so much of it and I had to do it so fast that I had to get out of my own way. It
Definitely.
was,
Mhm. Yeah,
it
and
was
also
monumental, not pressure, but a monumental weight to carry, but it was also incredibly freeing.
Definitely.
yes, yes. And since mentioned on the 25th, anniversary video. Oh my gosh, that video was amazing.
Yeah,
Yes,
definitely.
Thanks.
yes,
Yes.
that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, and so you've also written and co-written a few Sesame songs. Do you have any favorites that you contributed to?
Oh boy, oh boy. Well, they once asked me to do a semi hip hop slash funk version of the theme. That was a ton of fun. And I've done so many versions of the alphabet, including songs where we didn't use the traditional alphabet song, where I had to write a new song, and some of those were really funky. Um, oh, I know what my favorite is. Yes, I do have a favorite. We did an animation based on this book called The Maestro Plays that was ostensibly, I guess, about a circus, but not really. It was about the music director of the circus. There wasn't a story. It was the maestro plays tenderly, and you would see, let's say, a ballerina on a trapeze moving gracefully. The maestro plays hurriedly, and you might see a little rabbit doing leaps in a circus arena. Every page was these gorgeous illustrations, like modern art, and it was just another mood that you might find in a circus or anywhere in life, And the words, like, they had one was the maestro plays rippingly, and it had like 6 R's. It was like rippingly, So the producer gave me the book. Nothing had been animated. She gave me the book and she said, write music and we'll work to that. And I did meet the person who was going to do the voiceover, and we talked it through, and I listened to him read the book. And then I just went away and used my imagination to create these feelings and these sensations. And they animated to that. And it was a musical adventure of monument. I mean, the whole thing was probably 2.5 minutes, but each page was so unique and different. I felt compelled to create a great deal of sonic difference from page to page. And whatever the emotion or the feeling was, I had to take it as far as it could be taken so that the contrasts were really clear, so that the lesson, the impact of each page was so clear. So it was, we had to record each page separately and then edit it together into one piece. And to this day, I think that's probably or up there with my favorite experiences there.
Yeah.
Nice.
One other close second is they got the rights at one point to go into the Museum of Modern Art and pick certain paintings and photograph them where they were and then hand them to the animators and make them come alive. And all of the purpose was simply to expose young kids to modern art. They didn't make stories out of them, but like they had Picasso, early Cubist piece called Three Musicians. And they're not, it's hard, they're anthropomorphic, but they're Cubist, and you can make out a music stand and you can sort of see a clarinet and sort of a violin. So I wrote a piece for it, and they they made the painting come alive. That was a wonderful chance. We had like 6 or 7 paintings. One of the great things about working on Sesame Street, when they interviewed me, I asked the question, it has always seemed to me that when I watch Sesame Street, that there's a sort of a subtext. You use so many different styles of music. There's sort of a subtext that you're also educating about music indirectly, because you explore so many styles. Is that right? Can I take that and run with it? And they said, yes, absolutely. That's right. And, we want you to go as far as your imagination can take you. And the other thing was, do you write down? Do you think this is for kids? No, we never write down. We use the lyrics to be educational, but the lyrics have to meet the same standard that you would expect from an adult song. And the music has to be legit music. It can never be silly, can never be childish. You can never condescend, or you can never simplify just for the sake of the kids. So the music that I wrote for those modern art pieces and for the Maestro plays was as sophisticated as anything I've ever written in my life.
Definitely.
Yes.
I said to somebody asked me when I was there, somebody outside the show asked me how fulfilling I found it, something along those lines. Anything you wish you did that you don't get to do? And I said, well, I would say that I get to do everything I've ever dreamt of here, except it all has to be about a minute, 10 seconds long.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's two things I'm wondering about if you did them. So the first thing is after the theme song, they would have like an instrumental of the Sesame Street theme play that would start and someone would come out and say, "Hi, welcome to Sesame Street." Did you do that?
There was one from the real old days. From your era, what you probably heard most was a piece was done by Steve Lawrence, who's another composer and songwriter. Then at a certain point, they came to me and they said that they wanted to do a brand new version of the theme that would become the theme, that instead of being modern, harkened back to the original feel. They wanted it to recapture the value of the original, but in a new outfit. Let's say, because for a long time the theme had been, a lot of synthesizers and
yeah, because they used the same theme song for a long time.
Right. So I recorded a version. We brought back the harmonica solo, and we did it with all acoustic instruments. And then I'm pretty sure that they utilized the instrumental track from that after for the welcome moment.
And the other thing is the end credits that they used with like the animated
also
buildings.
Stephen Lawrence. That's Stephen Lawrence. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
a
crazy.
Talented guy. Tremendously talented guy.
Yes.
Definitely. So now did you get to work with any of the celebrities that would come on Sesame Street? Like did you have any favorite celebrity guests to work with?
I have two favorite moments. Because, well, you'll see why. Little Richard came and it was decided that he was going to do Rubber Ducky, right?
Oh yeah.
And he walked in.
Yeah, and the Rosita song too.
Yeah, Rosita song. Yeah.
Well, Richard walked in, and first of all, Richard created rock and roll basically, and he created a style of piano that is you still hear today in records. So to me, he was God, right? And he walked in. Well, first of all, we pre-recorded the tracks. This was the standard operating procedure at Sesame Street. Pre-recorded the tracks, and the vocals, if you were on the street, the vocals were live, but to playback, right? So I had to create the track for him, and I was careful. I played rock and roll, my part, piano part, but I sort of edged more to Fats Domino. I didn't want to do like Little Richard's signature licks in case he was offended, and the plan was he was going to sing it and then play the piano. So my piano was just to hold it together. It was just demo, right? And he walked in, and the first thing he said was, "I played at the White House last night. It was a big gala, and I was up really late, and then I had to travel here, so I'm tired. I haven't slept. But I want you to know before we start work that I feel like this is far more important, because this far more important than being at the White House, because this is for the children." So he was not just humble, he was almost awestruck. He was almost like intimidated. not by being in a recording studio or not because we were famous, but because of the purpose of the job, you know? And he didn't read. He was not literate. So he couldn't read the lyrics. He definitely didn't read music. So you had to go sort of line by line with him. So it took a while, but then I knew he was tired. After the vocal was down, I said to him, do you want to take a break? You want to take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then come back and lay down the piano? And he didn't know I was a piano player, right? And he looked at me. This is Little Richard. He looked at me and he said, listen, I've been hearing this track now over and over again for the last hour. And whoever played it, man, that's fantastic. To tell you the truth, it would be my honor to sit at the piano and pretend to move my fingers and leave that. That's great. And he didn't know that I was the guy. And here's Little Richard telling me that he didn't think he could play the piano track on his song as well as I had.
Wow. So you
My
played the piano on
gosh.
that song?
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's cool.
Wow.
You know, it's moments like that. You have these moments sometimes where you feel like if I step outside and get hit by a bus, it's fine. It's fine. know, The other one, which was similar to that, was the Neville brothers. I loved the Neville brothers. And we met with Charles Neville, who was sort of the leader of the band and organizationally the leader, over a period of time of weeks, you know, working on a particular song and what the arrangement would be like and how he would give it to the other guys in the band to learn and all this. And again, I had to record a track, and I left the track fairly spare. I did it in the style of the Neville brothers, but I left it fairly spare. So if they wanted to come in and replace anything or add anything, they could. So they walked in, and Charles comes over and says to me, listen, I'm really sorry, but we've been on tour and everybody had the tape, but I don't think anybody's listened to it. So I don't think they know the song. Okay, fine. So we played it once for them. Everybody gathers around the studio, and these are big guys. They're like immense people. They look like football players. Charles is skinny, but they're big, muscular, kind of scary looking tattooed people. You know what I mean? And they gather around the mic. We decided we wanted them all in, you know, to be in close proximity to one another so that it would be like it was live.
Mhm.
So I think we put up one stereo mic, and they were all around this mic. And what you hear is, yo, man, what are you going to do? You're going to sing the high part? You're going to sing the low part? I don't know. You move over. You don't give me any room. And they're all arguing. That's what you hear. And I'm going, oh, my God, what is this going to be? Right. And so the engineer goes, okay, guys, we're ready. You want to roll tape?
Mhm.
And they sing perfect 5-part harmony
Wow.
from the beginning of the song to the end.
Wow.
And I'm just, my jaw's on the floor. And I turn to the engineer. I go, shit, I wish we recorded that. And he goes, yeah, we recorded that. And then they started arguing again because, you know, this one felt like that guy stepped on his line at a certain point, or, you know, you crossed over to my harmony part or whatever. So we did one other take. That was it.
Wow.
And again, then I said, you guys want to, you know, we've got a Hammond organ here. We've got drums. We've got congas. We've got saxophones, or whatever you need, you know, guitar amps, whatever you want to do to the track. And Charles said, this track doesn't need anything. We would just be muddying it up. This sounds like us.
Huh.
So, you know, again, these were musical idols of mine.
Wonderful.
Definitely. And one song that I'm also really proud of that you wrote is the song with Garth Brooks, Together We Make Music.
Yes, I was about to mention that.
Yes.
Thank you. You
Yes,
know,
it's great song.
thank you.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
Boom,
I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to put into the show, and it's a tight-knit group that had been together for 25 years, you know, and I was the new guy on the block. So I would go to the producers and say, what if we did a bit about, and they would go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so then I would start to write them, and I would give with a script and everything, you know, just a bit, but all the dialogue and the setup, and they would go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I forget, originally somebody, it wasn't going to be Garth Brooks, it was going to be somebody else. And I wrote that. I wrote the scene. I wrote the whole thing.
Wow.
And I got the usual, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then whoever it was backed out, and Garth Brooks was booked, and the producer came to me and said, you remember that thing you wrote? I think that would work for Garth Brooks. So it wasn't just my song. I wrote the whole scene.
Wow. That's awesome.
And
Wow.
yeah, so, you know, and I loved what he did, and I loved what the Muppets did. I thought it was so charming the way they approached it. You know, yeah, that was a wonderful moment for me.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely.
Yes, and the other song that you did, I know, is Elmo's rap alphabet.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I told you I did some funky alphabets.
Yeah.
And that was one of them.
As well as
Yeah.
the song "Do the Alphabet" is
Yep.
another one,
Yeah.
Yep.
which I have in the
Yep.
background, the "Do the Alphabet" DVD. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you doing your homework.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, of course. You
This
know,
means what we do.
Yeah.
yes, exactly. You know, for what you've done, you know,
For Sesame,
with
yeah.
Robert Duck
Sesame.
and Together We Made Music and lots of others. You know, you've done a great job for what you do, you know, for those songs.
Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you very much.
Yes, a pleasure.
Yes.
One of my personal favorites was "My Name Is Zoe," which was
thank you for saying that. Yeah. Yeah, I took some chances with that one. I remember the drummer telling me that it was the hardest chart he ever played in his life because Zoe was this, you know, sort of overactive, hyper, character, and I wanted to make the music reflect that, you know. So the beat keeps changing and it's sort of jagged and all this stuff. But yeah, that was I enjoyed that. And Fran Brill, who did Zoe,
I love Fran.
Yes.
she got a big kick out of it. You know, she saw it as somebody finally wrote a piece of material that was worthy of Zoe. Let's put it that way. That really represented her. You know, so yeah, there were some great moments like that. You know, that was the thing about working in this pool of incredible talent. You write for them. You know what they can do, and you know what they're about. That first day that I joined up, I didn't know the characters, but you come to know the characters. You watch them develop. You watch the writers change them, and you see the puppeteers adding things, and until they become like people, and you know them. You know?
Right.
So when it comes time to write a piece for them, it's first of all, it's a responsibility. You have to meet what they are and teach whatever the song is supposed to teach, but in a way that's appropriate to that character. And you know that the performer is going to take it to the greatest place it can possibly go. You know, it's going to be as great as you ever hoped it to be, you know. It's just a wonderful thing. There are some composers who didn't do that. There were some people in our talent pool who got a kick out of writing kind of whatever they want. And wouldn't it be funny if Big Bird sang this? You know, I think I'll write a a jazz tune and have Big Bird sing it. And they had nothing to do with Big Bird. It's just it's a funny juxtaposition. So it kind of works, but that was never my approach. My approach was always, what is it about Big Bird that could express this? You know, how do I write something, even if it's a little different from the style we're used to from him? How do I write it so that he finds himself in this song? You know?
Definitely.
Yeah. And since you mentioned Fran and Kevin, in the future, we're interviewing Kevin, and possibility we might get Fran Brill. So we're gonna interview them. That'd be amazing. So moving on to your work for Nickelodeon, you did some worked on Nick Jr. online. Can you touch upon what you did for it?
Yeah, yeah, that was an interesting, a very different kind of job. They wanted to
Yeah.
create an online radio presence, which isn't like radio. It's like if you went to the website, there would be in a corner on the opening page a little thing that looked like a radio. And if you clicked on it, it took up the whole screen and you could pick a playlist that was around the theme, like quiet time or playtime or dance or whatever. And you could turn the playlist on and then click on the radio again and it would shrink down to the corner and you could keep going from page to page and the music would continue until you stopped it. So they called it stickiness. Music will stick with you no matter what else you're doing. You could play games, you could watch things and hear the music. And I was hired to design those playlists, to design the sonic part of the radio station. So I
Oh,
had to
nice.
do, I had to write like call letter things,
Hmm.
you know, what was it? Nickelodeon radio is just for you kind of thing,
Oh, yeah,
things like
yeah, yeah.
that. Um,
Yeah.
and do it in different styles and different styles of their different shows and all the rest of the stuff, and then compile playlists that were repeatable and loopable and all and integrated with little not ads exactly, but little inserts like station IDs,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
they wanted I started with their library, all the music from all the Nickelodeon shows. But once you have a theme, whatever the theme is, Mom and I, whatever the theme is, there were so many other children's songs. They wanted to be able to compete a little bit with Radio Disney, which was radio. But so I started drawing in children's songs from recording artists and other networks and stuff, and how to get the clearances, and we had to record the station IDs and logos. I brought kids into the studio, and it was a process that I wasn't sure I would like because I wasn't creating a lot of the music. I was just creating the station IDs, and sometimes they were based on themes that were already used by Nickelodeon, and sometimes they were completely original. But I ended up loving it. I loved it was like being a curator at a museum, curating these sounds, and sometimes inserting something that was a little off center but might draw attention. I was able to pull in some songs by unknowns, that people who'd put out a record and sold 25 copies and nobody knew who they were, but the song was great.
Hmm.
So I don't know, it appealed to me, and I like the people I work with. It was a funny thing because I guess I was in my early 40s, maybe late 30s, something like that. And I was the oldest person there, except for my immediate supervisor.
Hmm.
It was very strange to go into a meeting and they all looked like kids to me, uh, and there was a cultural difference that I ran into, which is that I'm a hard worker, and I get excited about what I do. So I'll get up early in the morning and work till late at night because it's fun. And there was nobody there who wanted to come in before 10 o'clock in the morning,
Hmm.
because they went out and partied afterwards. I mean, they lived a young person's life.
Right.
It was a little bit of a culture shock for me, but I loved being part of that. I really did. I really had a ton of fun with it.
Definitely.
Awesome.
So now also on Nick Jr., you also co-created and wrote music for a pilot called Story for Ya. Can you talk
Oh, you
about how
guys
that
really did
started?
your homework. Yeah. Well, when this happened, my wife was second in command of Nickelodeon animation at that
Wow.
time, and I think yeah, and because eventually she ran the whole thing, but she had this idea that of doing a show that was centered around music in some way, but story driven. and she had gone to she had collected a group of writers and asked them each to contribute a pitch to come up with an idea for this. And she kept coming home and saying to me, "Oh, so and so is he's got this crazy idea, and it's not going to work because of this, and or this idea would work if it were this, but I can't get him to see it." She kept coming home and telling me about the ideas she was receiving and her frustration because she didn't feel any of them were right. And I started saying, "Well, but what if they did that? What if they did that?" And I could see from her reaction what she liked and what she didn't like. So one day she came home and I listened to her spiel. And then I said, "What about a show that does this?" And I described something to her. And she said, "Write that up." So I did, and she said, "No, the form is all wrong. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this." So I did exactly what she said. I had a 1-page proposal and she brought it to work. I never thought that was going to happen. Right. And they liked it. And we ended up, they commissioned a script. I wrote the script. I wrote the songs, and they had commissioned, I don't know, maybe 10 scripts, and they were narrowing them down. It finally came down to us and the Fresh Beat Band. And we both got to make pilots. Right. So here I am suddenly, when they greenlight the pilot, they give you a contract for the whole series. It's like, we're not going to waste time. In case we pick this up, let's do all the paperwork now. So I'm connected to the whole series, and I'm named not just writer, producer. I'm named producer. Now, I've produced a ton of music sessions. I've never produced television, So, of course, I had a co-producer. But it was another one of these situations of being thrown into a situation, thrown into circumstance and a job that I really didn't know how to do, but I had the vision for the show. I knew what the show should look like and sound like, and what it was meant to say and communicate, and who was directed toward. But I'm the producer, so I'm involved in every single meeting. The meetings about what should the costumes look like, what should the cast be like, what should the age range be, what should the sets be, which is something. It's an incredible experience to be in on the ground floor of something that's so multidimensional and get to be close up and intimate with every aspect as it's put together and as it's created, from something I saw inside my head to something. First of all, it's collaborative. Set designer comes in, not executing my idea, but with their own idea. And then I give my input to the purpose that their idea is meant to serve. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And, including to the co-producer and the person who's going to be the director, and everybody's contributing ideas. And you see this thing come to life from what had been, something I imagined, to something I wrote on a page, to something 3-dimensional with actors and a band. And, it's an unbelievable process, an unbelievable experience. So we didn't get picked up, but the producer, my co-producer, who had modified certain things in ways that I would have preferred not. Afterwards, he called me up and he was very apologetic. And he said, first of all, in hindsight, I think you were probably right on most of the creative decisions. And I'm sorry about that, but I'm so sorry that this didn't get picked up. And I said, you want to know something? I would have loved to have gone forward with this. I really would have. I can't imagine a better way to spend the next couple of years. But this was a freaking great experience in and of itself that I never would have had. I found the experience so fulfilling and so new. And, as a creator, I've been very fortunate in having found and being offered opportunities to bring my ideas to fruition and have them go out before the public, so they're actually used. That's a fabulous thing. But to be part of something that's bigger than me, that involves the creativity of many other people in areas that I'm not an expert in, I couldn't possibly have done myself, and watch them work and learn about their area. It's like creating a little universe in a community of people who also want to create a universe. And you're all coming together and creating something that none of you thought of individually. It's bigger than everybody. That's extraordinary. And, you know, to me, it was too bad that it didn't go forward, but it was completely fulfilling in and of itself. It was a magical time. Every minute spent on that was absolutely magical, you know?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Definitely.
Have you guys seen it? I mean, somebody told me that they saw a note of it on the Nickelodeon website, which made no sense.
I don't think so.
No, I
Yeah,
I
haven't.
don't think so.
Huh.
Track down if I can. I got to figure out which of my hard drives the songs are on. Maybe I can send you a couple of the songs. I can't send you the actual finished edited thing because I don't own it. Nickelodeon
Right.
does.
Yeah.
Right.
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 I could
Right.
maybe send you a couple of songs so you can listen to them.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Sure.
That'd be nice.
Nice.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of your current jobs in the music business is working as the director and audio and music supervisor for One More Story.
Yep.
Can you talk about that and what's that like?
Yes. A fellow named Carl Teitelbaum was at one time a film editor and became a director of documentaries. And he got hired by Sesame Street to do some film shorts for them. And I became his music guy. And he's a wonderfully down to earth, smart, sensitive guy. We got along great instantly. He was delighted by the music I did for his pieces. We did a whole bunch of pieces together. And then he came to me one day and said, you know, I have a sister who's an educator. She's got this idea about creating an online presence that prepares kids to read. Would you be interested in helping out? And I said, yeah, sure, you know. And I don't know that I understood the full extent of what it was going to be. We started with one book, and I had to write the theme song, and I did a voice because the theme song is sung by a bookworm. So I did a character voice, and I became the speaking character voice of the bookworm. And I wrote music for this book. It was kind of a similar process to like the modern art pieces where I wrote music and then they animated to the music. There's no animation. They take the actual book and they photograph the book. If there's a lot of text on a particular page, they may storyboard it so they have a close up of a character, or you know, they may turn the page into 3 shots, and so you don't only see the whole page, and divide the text between their 3 pages from the one page. They remove the text. In most kids' books, the text is embedded in the picture. They remove it from there. They put it at the bottom. They hire professional, I should say we hire professional voiceover people from theater, from film, from television, and people who specialize in voiceovers. And the idea is to read the book as if there's a group of kids at your feet, like you're really reading to people in person. Some of the readers do voices, character voices for the characters in the book. Some of them just read with expression. And I edit those vocals to get the, you know, a final take after we've done several takes with them, and pace it in such a way that there's time for each word that appears printed to light up as it's spoken. So there's a visual equivalent. The fundamentals of reading, the current theories on learning to read, it starts with storytelling, understanding that ideas flow in a logical sequence. Before you can read, you have to be able to grasp that concept, that a story goes through time in a sequence. Events happen that lead to other events. So first of all, if they just follow the story, they're learning something about reading. Second of all, we're not literally teaching them to read, but the words are there and they light up. So they're going to draw your eye. So you start to develop an equivalent between a sound you heard and the way the word looks. Right.
Mhm.
And I created, for some of the books, I create sound effects if I feel like it needs to be grounded in reality, which I had never done before. That was a new thing for me. And I create music. We don't animate. It's literally just still pictures. But the idea is you always see the book binding. We don't want you to forget that you're looking at a book, right? So this is something you could hold in your hands and read. So the music becomes like the animation. It's the action you can imagine, or the emotion you can imagine by reading the still words on the page, you know. And over the years, it's grown to include things like there are vocabulary lists. You can choose to read it yourself without the voiceover. If you get stuck on a word, you just put your mouse on the word and you can hear, first of all, it goes on the list for you. If the app was used in a or the website was used in a classroom, each individual child in the classroom will have his own list. And you can get a definition of the word, and you can get the word spoken in the context of other sentences from other books. So you understand the word in context. There are questions. Some of the books have what we call the listening game questions that we place, are designed to be placed right after an event. So an event happens and you ask a question about it, reading comprehension thing. But a teacher has the option to move the questions. If she has a particular student in her room who reads very well, she might put all the questions at the end, assuming this child will read the whole book or hear the whole book, remember the book and understand the book and be able to answer all the questions after the book is over, as opposed to right after an event happened. Teacher can make up his or her own questions and record them and insert them into the book. So there's a lot of interactivity. We're at this point, we're like constantly growing the different types of interactive activity that we can offer. We've won all kinds of awards. There was a year where Entertainment Weekly puts out an annual magazine that's the best gifts of the year to give to children. And the year they included us, we were the #1 preferred gift over a 6 CD package of the best songs of Sesame Street, over a Wii, video console.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we were it,
Mhm.
So we've had not enough notoriety, but a lot of notoriety. And my wife, I love the fact that my wife, when she was at Nickelodeon, used to say that the production value of what we were doing bested their online presence. We're very, very conscientious. The sound has to be great. The videos have to be great. If we do books from all over the world, and if there's a book that has any passage that's in another language, we have to be 100% certain we know what's being said, so it's appropriate for the kids. I have sometimes inserted music from other cultures. Most of the time it's me composing it in the style of, but occasionally, for whatever reason, I grab a piece of music for authenticity's sake that exists in another culture and put it in there. And again, my boss will always say, do you know the translation? Do you understand what they're saying? Because I don't want any parent who happens, who maybe immigrated from that country, calling me up saying, that's a sexual ritual, that song. So we're very, very conscientious about everything that goes into it. It's been a wonderful experience for me, because if you do a book that tells the story of traditional life in Mongolia, I do the research to find out what traditional music was in Mongolia hundreds of years ago, in the days of Genghis Khan. We did a book about that, about the days of Genghis Khan and how people lived. And um, it's a thrill to be able to be asked to do research like that, and then to undertake the challenge of trying to make music that sounds like that. You know, they had their own instruments, different from our instruments, and traditions and scales and everything. It was very different from what I know. We did a book that was a basic calendar book, you know, January, February, March, but it was all based on pre-Columbian holidays from Central and South America. So each month was identified with one of these holidays. I had to research the culture of tribes, you know, small tribes in the mountains of Guatemala, because that's who was being talked about. And I found music and I found styles, and I, you know, it was like, it was the equivalent of having spent years studying this stuff just to produce this one book. It's a privilege. It's an incredible privilege.
Definitely. Definitely. So I know we're getting close to wrapping up here, so I'm kind of curious. So what are you working on now? Can you share anything you're working on now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, one more story continues, and I hope will continue for a long time to come. Several years ago, what? I'm sorry.
I said I hope so too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank
Of course.
It's interesting. The company has had buyout offers that several times. They've all fallen through, but among others, we've been wooed by several Asian companies.
Oh,
you know,
wow.
if you get bought out by an Asian company, we don't need to be bought out as in surrender. We want to continue being the production team, but have somebody else supplying the distribution and the marketing and the money for it, you know. But if you get bought by an Asian team, you're instantly available to millions upon millions of people because the population is so enormous, you know. Anyway, we at this point we're in, I don't know, something like 15 or 16 countries that have asked to utilize us to teach English as a second language, which was the goal. The goal from the get-go was to be useful to people who need to learn to read, whether they're English speaking or not, whether they were literate or not. You know, initially the idea was kids, but I would like to see us eventually in prisons for people who are adults but never learned to read. You know, our technique will work for anybody. So, you know, hopefully it will continue to grow and expand. Right before I moved, I'm in Los Angeles now. Right before I moved to LA, a friend and I collaborated on writing and producing a one-night reunion of cast members from across the 5 years of the off-Broadway production of Little Shop and the Broadway production. And we designed it so that it wasn't just a performance of the show. It was songs interspersed with backstage stories as told by the people who experienced them. And everybody got to write their own, you know. We ended up with a cast of 28, and it could have been 50. I can't tell you how many people came out of the woodwork who had something to do with the show and wanted to participate in this thing. We couldn't include everybody, but people came from all over America to be part of this. It was so emotional that people wept at the rehearsals because it brought back so much for them. And it was a sensational experience. We did 2 sets in one night, and we got the whole thing videotaped. And I thought I was gonna, you know, edit and distribute these videos, and I'm too busy. It didn't work out until recently. I found myself with time on my hands, and I started going through this footage and editing it and posting it. I have a YouTube channel for this for everybody who participated. So now I'm also doing video editing, something else I never thought I would do.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
Such a joy. And it's such an interesting process because the show is written about young people who looking at the life they hope they will be able to have, but they don't really have the resources or the opportunity to achieve the life they want. Well, now it's being performed by people who have lived life and experienced happiness and disappointment and sorrow and tragedy, and they've been through it all, but they're singing these words, but from this other place. There's a depth and a dynamic thing to these performances that's just astonishing, you know.
Awesome.
So I'm still involved in that editing, and I've also been tapped to teach songwriting at my alma mater via Zoom.
Nice.
I went to school at
Awesome.
what was then Queens College. Well, it's still called Queens College, part of the City University of New York, but the music department is now the Aaron Copland School of Music. And a former student of mine, one of my first students when I was in graduate school and I was teaching, has become the head of a subdivision of the music school that teaches the skills required to do commercial music. He teaches recording, he teaches mixing, he teaches film scoring, and he hired me. He called me up and hired me to teach songwriting. So I teach songwriting at the university level now. Those are the two main things. And the offshoot of that is, I think I'm going to record an album.
Oh,
at this
nice.
stage of my life, it's sort of ridiculous,
Wow.
but I find teaching songwriting unleashed something for me. And a day doesn't go by that I don't find myself writing songs in my head. Every time I take a walk, there's lyrics and melody and stuff. And I've been writing this stuff down or recording it. And I have a very different perspective than a 20-year-old pop star, because I'm not 20. I have a very different perspective on life. And the only other person that I can think of outside of maybe some country singers who is doing this is Leonard Cohen, who's in his 80s now and still recording. And his music, what his songs are about, like, it's just vastly different point of view than anything else you hear in pop. And I've started to feel like I want people to hear this stuff. You know, it has validity. So you may be you may be getting an early copy of a Robby Merkin album at some point.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Fantastic.
Nice. So, are there any words you'd like to say to those watching or listening who have supported your work over the years?
Oh, well, you know, first of all, because I'm a behind the scenes guy, I think that most people who quote unquote supported my work had no idea it was me, which is delightful. But
Right, yeah.
I'm thrilled that I've been in a position to have reached people, for people to have heard things and be affected by it. I've had people, when I've worn the Sesame Street jacket, I've had people stop me and say, my child learned to read from your show. Couldn't learn in school. School wasn't doing it, but learned from your school, from your show. I meet people like you who remember specific songs and enjoyed specific songs that I contributed. Or, I mean, Little Mermaid, you know, if I mention to somebody that I was involved with Little Mermaid, it's like the reactions are incredible, you know?
Right, like, yeah.
Yeah.
So first of all, I am incredibly grateful to have had those opportunities. I'm thrilled to hear from people who were affected in any way or got any enjoyment or anything in their lives out of it. I'm thrilled to know that there are many people I'll never hear from who experience that. I'm a lucky guy. I'm an incredibly lucky guy. And I always wanted to do this. I mean, it took a long time for me to decide this was going to be my career, but who gets to actually do it and have it have an effect on the world? I'm so lucky. You know, it's a blessing, not only because I so love making music, but because it goes out there and people feel things as a result.
Exactly.
Somebody asked me the other day, a guy who wasn't in the entertainment business at all, but he asked me, you've worked hard in your life and you've achieved things, what word of advice would you give to somebody who's starting out? And I said, no matter what you see around you, you will see people who take an easy road. You will see people who get promoted beyond what they deserve. You'll see people who find shortcuts. None of that matters. Do the work. Work hard. Work to your own standard. Find a standard. However good you want to be at something, work hard enough to achieve that. And success will or will not come, but it won't come if you don't try that path first. And take opportunities. I owe my career to opportunities that came to me about which I knew nothing, but I accepted the challenge. So take opportunities. You never know where something's going to lead. And finally, if you hit failure or rejection or disappointment, I have plenty of times. Tomorrow's another day. It's a cliche, but it's 100% true. Every minute that you're alive and moving forward, there's a chance for everything that's possible to happen.
Exactly.
It's I mean, it's not like on the 15th day, you only have a quarter chance left. It's every single minute, anything is possible. So you don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know what door is going to open. You don't know what can take place. So you got to just move forward,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of course.
So if people would like to connect with you, where can people find you?
Oh. I'm not going to give you my personal email
Right.
because
Right.
I'll be overwhelmed.
Right.
Right.
Probably get a bunch
can-
of spammers too.
Bunch of spammers too.
And plus 8 million tapes from people who want to make it in the business. When I was at Sesame Street, I participated in numerous workshops for people who were interested in getting into the business. And I always walked out with hundreds of tapes. And I would say to people, you understand I'm the music director of Sesame Street. I'm never going to listen to this because I have no time. It's a full-time experience. I'll take it if you push it on me, but I'm never going to listen to it,
Right.
Anyway, I guess you can get in touch with me through One More Story. That's how you guys got in touch with me. You can get in touch with me through the City University of New York, CUNY, through Queens College, or the Aaron Copland School of Music. Yeah, those will work.
Nice.
Yeah,
Or
nice.
through you guys. Through you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Description to be down below.
Oh, yes.
So people can reach out that way.
Yes. Yes. So to end this off, to end this off,
Yes.
Jake is going to be asking the last question that we ask all of our guests at the end.
Okay.
Yes. So, of course, this podcast is called Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. When you think of
love the name.
nostalgia,
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
So, when you think of nostalgia, what do you think of, or or the way in your words, how will you define the word nostalgia?
I haven't thought about it in those terms, but I've actually been thinking about how I look at my past. I don't mean me personally, but the world
Right.
I've lived through.
Mhm.
I think we are in a world where values change over time, and sometimes quite suddenly. Sometimes it's in response to a political movement or a philosophical change. Sometimes it's in response to new technology or new opportunities or whatever it is. But values are
Mhm.
always changing. When I look back, I can kind of see moments where a certain set of values was present in the culture.
Mhm.
Each one of those periods, to me, to the extent that those values are no longer what drives most of us, I'm nostalgic for that. That's nostalgia to me.
Oh,
They were all valid in their way. Sometimes it wasn't great values, but things happened in those periods that won't happen now
yeah.
because of those changes.
Right.
Things that are gone that had value of some sort, anything like that I have a connection to feels like nostalgia. On the other hand, things like I still listen to Beatles songs like they're brand new because they are. They're timeless. There are things that
Oh yeah.
that transcend those changes. There
And
and those things
same goes with Elvis, music as well. You mentioned
absolutely,
Elvis musical too.
absolutely. And so that's not nostalgia to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Making connections to things that can last or have lasted.
Yeah.
That's not nostalgia. It's the things that we no longer have. So you don't have the Sesame Street you grew up with. Sesame Street exists, but not the one you grew up with.
But not the same way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, to that extent, I was telling somebody asked me if I watched the Grammys, and I didn't. And I have a lot of reasons, and I'm not going to go into all the reasons, but I did talk a little bit about, in response, about how the music business has changed and how recording and performing has changed and what I feel is lost. Now, it's not a criticism of what there is. There's great creativity and there's tremendous talent, but certain things have been lost that I miss, That's nostalgia.
Definitely. Good. Well, Robby, thank you so much for doing this.
Yes,
this was a blast.
yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll send you guys some additional material.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. And I will
absolutely.
I will reach out to you when this goes up too.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so
Thank
enjoy
you.
it.
Yeah, of course.
Enjoy the rest of your day. This was a blast, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much for what you've done, being a part of childhood. Keep up great
childhoods.
work, and see what's next for you.
Well,
Yes.
that's what it's for, man. That's
Yes, of course. I'm glad.
Nothing
for
makes me happier
us.
than hearing that.
Yes,
Aw.
and thank you so much. For knowing you and starting great
Getting to do
friends,
this,
and now yes, and
Yes.
now
Yes.
It's
working
the
everything,
pleasure's
so.
mine as well. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
rest of your day,
Have a
Robby.
great rest of your day, Rob.
thanks.
Yes.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Oh, that was a fun chat, guys. And to all of
Yes,
our
it was.
to all of our
Yes.
viewers and listeners,
And
it's goodbye from
Rob
us
here
too.
as well.
Goodbye from us as well.
Remember to keep
Yes.
nostalgia alive, everyone.
See you next
Bye-bye.
time for
Bye.
more episodes on the way. See you next time. Keep nostalgic. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show interview. Be sure to follow Jake and the crew on social media and stream the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye.